Alright, what's going on, y'all? It's your boy Anonymous, and we are reacting to 5 disturbing and bizarre mysteries solved at last. I want to upload again, I want to get back in the grind of uploads and all that, so um sorry for not keeping up my upload streak like I said last video. Check that video out if you haven't. But this dude right here, Lazy Masquerade, he is so scary. Like he's one of my favorite YouTubers for sure. I always watch his videos late at night. I get scared. I scare myself. So you know, turning the lights off. Ah, see. All right, let's get on with the video. Ooh, it's low-key scary.
I cover a lot of unsolved mysteries on this channel, but occasionally it's nice to have some answers. So today, we'll be examining 4 former mysteries that have thankfully been cracked by smarter minds than my own. We'll kick things off with a case that was only just resolved last month, and let me tell ya, this one's like something straight out of American Psycho.
Bro.
Fahim Saleh was a young man with big ideas. Described by his friends as the Elon Musk of the developing world, he started his first business while he was still in high school.
Okay.
He then went on to co-found 3 multi-million-dollar companies in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Nigeria. But despite achieving such success, Fahim wasn't the type of guy to just cash out and live a party lifestyle.
Hold on,
Instead, he turned his sights to the land of opportunity,
Alright.
America, where he founded a Manhattan-based venture capital firm in 2018. By the start of this year, his estimated net worth was around $150 million.
Dude's
With so much
rich.
cash in his coffers, the only limited resource this young CEO had was time. Unfortunately,
Dude is
that
rich,
resource was
bro.
about to run out. On July 14th, 2020, Fahim's sister went to his luxury $2 million apartment in New York to check up on him. Fahim's neighbors had contacted her the day prior, saying they heard loud screaming coming from his place.
Oh
Since
no,
he wasn't picking up his
bro.
phone, she went over to see what all the commotion was about. When she opened the door, she was immediately hit by a nauseating, metallic smell. She stepped inside and noticed something on the ground. It didn't quite register at first, but after a moment, she realized what she was looking at.
Bro, I'm fucking
It
scared,
was
bro.
Fahim's torso, lying next to an electric power saw. His head, arms, and legs had been cut off and placed into garbage bags elsewhere in
Jeez,
the
bro.
apartment. Investigators said
Hey, bro, may you rest in peace, cause no one deserves to go out like that. Like, I'm for real, like, no one deserves that shit.
that the young entrepreneur had been butchered the night before, and that Fahim's sister had likely interrupted the killer's cleanup job. Whoever had taken her brother's life had more than likely escaped through the back entrance when he realized she was coming inside.
Evil people out there, man, I
Once
swear.
news broke about Fahim's murder, the tech world went into shock. Theories started to fly around about who had taken his life. Could this have been some sort of organized hit? On his way to the top, Fahim had probably made his fair share of enemies, and definitely his fair share of competitors. Was this simply a robbery gone wrong? When you live in such a fancy condominium, you're bound to attract the eyes of some evil people, right?
Okay, but Times Square, that place is beautiful. Like, I went down there. Place is beautiful. I rated it 10 out of 10. There's so much to do there. Like, even if you're a kid, I haven't been there since I was a kid, but there's so much to do.
One of the first things the detectives did was check the complex's security tapes. What they found was of extreme interest. On the night of his death, Fahim was captured on CCTV entering the building with a man dressed entirely in black, including a black face mask. This unknown individual was carrying a briefcase. The 2 men entered the key-secured elevator that led to Fahim's 7th floor apartment. When the door to the elevator opened, Fahim could be seen struggling with the man in black before being forced into his flat. So, who was behind Fahim's untimely demise? Well, this has to be one of the shortest mysteries I've ever covered, as it thankfully only took 3 days to crack.
Dang.
On July 17th, Fahim's assistant,
That guy sucked at hiding the evidence. He deserved
Tyrese Haspil was arrested and charged with the slaying.
Oh shit. That guy deserves to get locked up. Like, I'm for real. Like, no one deserves to go out like that. Like, so much hatred. Like, why?
It came to light that Tyrese had recently been caught stealing $90,000 from Fahim and was subsequently fired. Rather than going to the authorities, Fahim gave Tyrese an opportunity to pay back the money and avoid criminal charges. By all accounts, Fahim
That dude just does not look like he would do that type of thing, you know what I'm saying? So, just, he probably didn't expect it at all from him.
was a pretty nice guy
Well, obviously.
who liked to give people a chance, and especially young folks. In this instance, however, he shouldn't have, as Tyrese responded by masking up, following his former boss into his apartment building, and using a taser to incapacitate him before stabbing him several times in his apartment. He then used the electric saw that he'd brought in his briefcase to slice up Fahim into easily disposable pieces. Tyrese was far from a mastermind, however, as he had used his own credit card to buy the saw and the taser, both of which were found at the scene since he ran from the apartment after Fahim's sister came. Their serial numbers were linked to his purchases, and he was also captured on CCTV shopping
Yeah,
film.
bro, he's so successful. That's the thing. He didn't even expect this. His life was going so well. I mean, you never know how anybody can be, you don't know what he's actually going through or anything, but safe to say, like, he was living a pretty good life with 150 million net worth. Like, it's crazy, man.
Shopping for cleaning supplies. As it stands, Tyrese has pleaded not guilty to taking Fahim's life, though with so much evidence against him, it seems like a pretty open and shut case. Regardless, I had to include this one for how recent and grisly it is. Now, if you'll excuse me, before the next entry, I have to return some videotapes.
That just gets me pissed off, dude. Like, honestly.
Well, we've covered a case that was solved just last month, so now let's explore a case that came to a close just last week.
Okay.
He was known by many names during his active years. In the early days, when he'd simply sneak into people's homes and steal trinkets and nightwear, he was
That shit is fucking
bizarrely
scary.
ransacker. In the late 70s, when he'd forcefully have his way with women, he became known as the original Night Stalker. As his crimes progressed,
I can't with these
so too
pictures,
did his
bro.
alias.
I can't, like,
When he started
that
taking
shit
lives,
disturbs the
the
fuck
media
out of me,
started
like-
calling him the Diamond Knot Killer.
I can't,
When
bro.
the authorities finally
These pictures,
realized
if I
that all of
see
these
more
individuals
pictures
were
like
actually the
this,
same
bro.
perp, they settled on a name that stuck.
This shit's
They called
scary.
him the Golden State Killer. During his 13-year-long reign of terror, he'd take the lives of 13 people and have his way with
God, bro, I seem like such a pussy. Oh God, my ass was like, I don't, I don't like. Hey, but
more than 50.
these people are evil, man.
He's credited as one of the reasons Americans started locking their doors at night. Let's start from the beginning. Over a 20-month period, starting in 1973, a man in Visalia, California, broke into at least 120 homes. Once inside, this unknown burglar would go through the homeowner's property, ignoring any valuable items or cash that he came across, and would simply vandalize their possessions and steal low-value items to keep as souvenirs. His motivation for doing this wasn't clear to anyone at the time, but it seems likely that he was using Visalia as a sort of training ground, honing his skills and nerve for his future activity.
Hey, bro, God's with me.
This all came to a head at the
Right.
end of his time in the
God's
city,
with me.
when he shot and killed a homeowner after he was caught trying to steal the man's daughter away from her room. The Golden State Killer had claimed his first life, and, unfortunately, like a dog that tastes blood for the first time, he hungered for more. Well, Goldilocks had escaped the heat by fleeing the city and moving to Sacramento, where his crimes escalated. Now no longer content with just breaking into people's homes and trashing their property, he instead would intentionally target the homes of couples. He'd break in the middle of the night, armed of course, and would tie up the male partner. He would then forcefully have his way with the female. When Bob and Gay Hardwick awoke in the early hours in the spring of 1978, they saw an unknown figure standing at the foot of their bed, shining a flashlight in their faces. He ordered Mrs. Hardwick to tie up her husband, and then stacked plates and dishes on his back, a trademark of his. He then took her into another room, warning Mr. Hardwick to remain still, because if he heard any of the dishes fall or smash, he'd take both of their lives. For several hours, the intruder had his way with Mrs. Hardwick, stopping occasionally to help himself to a snack from their fridge, and sometimes going back to taunt Mr. Hardwick. He would often go quiet and hide in the shadows, leading the couple to think that he had finally left them alone, only for him to jump back out of the shadows again and continue tormenting them. Luckily, he stopped short of
People
slaying
are
the
so
couple.
fucking evil, dude. I
After having
hate that
spoken,
shit.
He skulked off back into the night, leaving the Hardwicks wondering if he really had left, or if he was still hiding in the house somewhere. This was just one of 50 known instances where he did this exact thing in and around Sacramento, shattering countless lives in the process. After this, Golden State moved to Southern California, and with this new move, he again kicked things up a notch. He continued to break into couples' homes and have his way with the females, but now, once he'd finished, he'd take the couple's lives. He usually did this by bludgeoning them with a pipe wrench or some similar tool. In total, he took the lives of 13 people during his spree, and would frequently call up the authorities and leave messages, wishing them Merry Christmas, telling them how they'd never catch him, etc. There was a massive campaign to catch Golden State. Billboards with various composites were put up, and a huge $50,000 reward was offered to anyone with information. Then, in 1986, after 13 long years of activity, his spree came to an abrupt end. Perhaps the heat was getting too much for old Goldie. Perhaps he'd just had his fill and decided enough was enough. Perhaps he had passed away. Still, detectives never gave up looking for him. He'd caused far too much carnage to escape justice. Sadly,
Did they find
their
him?
efforts were futile. That was, until the introduction of DNA analysis technology. Only then did they come to realize that the cases in Visalia, Sacramento, and Southern California were all the work of one man. 20 of Goldie's distant relatives had submitted their DNA to a website called GED Match. Detectives were able to link the DNA found at the crime scenes to that of the relatives, and from that, they were able to build a family tree. From there, they came across one individual who fit the profile of the man they were looking for perfectly. After 45 years of hunting and numerous failed leads and arrests, the investigators finally found their man.
Show me the dude.
Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police
This
officer.
ugly ass dude.
He was taken into custody in 2018 and ended up pleading guilty to 26 charges as a way of escaping the chair. Last week, he was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility for parole.
Damn, bro. Like,
Now,
how
at
can
the
you
age
do
of
that to
74,
someone?
he'll be
Like,
spending the remainder of his life
it's
behind
crazy,
bars.
bro. As he fucking deserves, bro. Stay in jail, motherfucker.
There's something particularly sickening about evil doctors and nurses who purposefully take
Hey, bro, I have this, like, a scary vibe going. I have fucking candle going. I have the lights turned off, like, psh.
the lives of their patients. Perhaps it's because they've sworn an oath to do the exact opposite of that, or because they're in a position of power over such vulnerable people, or because their medical knowledge helps them cover their tracks more easily. Anyway, no prizes for guessing what this next entry's about. A few days ago, I was surfing through Reddit as one does, when I came across an AMA titled, "I Hunt Medical Serial Killers. Ask Me Anything." Well, that caught my attention. The whole thread was hosted by a guy who worked on exposing doctors and nurses that use their medical expertise to prematurely end the lives of their patients, mostly just for the thrill of it. He even shared the disturbing insight that, although in a lot of these cases the other staff members know their coworker is killing their patients, they frequently still remain working without any action taken against them until the media or law enforcement gets involved. And that's disappointing to hear, but perhaps most of them just don't want to believe that one of their own could really be doing something so terrible, and convince themselves that they're just imagining things. I'm trying to look on the positive side here, guys. Anyway, one user asked the question, "In your opinion, what are some of the most crazy stories of medical serial killers?" "They're similar in some respects, and unique in others," replied the OP. "I think the nurse in Italy who took a selfie with her and the patient she had just murdered is pretty crazy." The nurse he was talking about is Daniela Poggiali. At her hospital in Lugo, northern Italy, medical staff started
Yeah, I remember her. I remember like hearing something on Reddit about her.
to become
She's
concerned with
crazy,
their
bro.
rising mortality rate. A lot of patients, particularly the older ones, were dying at an alarming rate. This perplexed most of them, who wanted to get to the bottom of this mystery. After a while, some of the other nurses started becoming suspicious of Daniela. They began to notice that she would sedate patients that would bother her during her shifts. This behavior started to raise a few eyebrows, and people secretly started paying more attention to what Daniela was getting up to on her rounds. The more keen-eyed amongst them realized that whenever Daniela was on duty, the death rate at the hospital went up, and whenever she'd go on vacation, it would drop back down again. A coincidence? Maybe, but definitely an observation that warranted closer inspection. In the end, it turned out that Daniela was indeed poisoning her patients with potassium chloride. A woman named Manuela Alki recalled how when her mother was sick at the hospital with a mild ailment, Daniela rushed her out of the room, saying that she had things to do. 10 minutes later, Manuela returned to find a small glass vial attached to her mother's drip feed, which hadn't been there before. This vial ran out in just a few minutes. After that, her mother started convulsing, and her eyes rolled back into her head. A few minutes after that, she was gone.
Poor lady.
Traces of potassium chloride leave
May
the
she
body
rest
very
in
quickly,
peace.
and it's extremely hard to detect. Luckily, one of her more suspicious co-workers quickly ran some tests on the dead woman, and found traces of the poison just in time. A used vial of potassium chloride was also found.
How can someone do that to another person? Like, why? Like, makes no sense. Makes no sense.
Found in a disposal unit. This was reported, and the
Some people
authorities soon paid a
disappoint
visit to
me, man.
Daniela. They asked if she could explain to them one thing. Why was she present for 93 deaths in 2 years at the hospital, more than 3 or 4 times the average of her other colleagues, and more than double that of the nurse with the second highest figure? Just bad luck, she said. Daniela was quickly arrested. During their investigation, a lot of disturbing details emerged surrounding Daniela. How she stole
Look at
her
how
patients'
happy
personal
she
belongings,
looks. Look at how
gave them
happy
extra
she looks,
laxatives
like
to
of
cause
what
trouble
she
for the
did.
next person on shift.
Every single
Administered
time I
sleeping
see,
agents to
I've
ensure an
seen
easy shift for
every
herself.
picture that I've seen, she's
They
smiling.
even learned that when one of her co-workers said they were going to report her for her behavior, Daniela subtly threatened them by leaving a funeral bouquet on the hood of their car. When they searched her phone, they found these 2 images of her, smiling and laughing next to the bodies of 2 patients whose lives she had just ended. She appeared in court, laughing and smiling just like in those photos, and didn't appear to be taking the whole thing.
Who's holding the camera? Oh, it might be like a portrait, like one of those timed pictures. But dude, who could be holding the camera?
Very seriously. While in prison, the blonde nurse received a slew of fan mail from admirers, and even got the odd marriage proposal or two. In a twisted way, she seemed to be enjoying the publicity she was receiving. In 2016, she was sentenced to life behind bars.
As she deserves.
Despite the authorities being sure of her guilt, and this case effectively being solved, Daniela made an appeal the following year, and was released in 2017 over a technicality. She still faces criminal action over the other deaths she's suspected of.
This shit is low-key scary, bro. Like, I'm scared as fuck right now. This dude, I watch this all the time with my brother, and like, it's just crazy what twisted people can do. It's nuts.
Here's an example of a case that was solved by the perp himself. It was 1977, and several people had gone missing in Indianapolis, Indiana. They were 24-year-old Karen Nils, her 2-year-old son, Robert, and 17-year-old Sandra Harris. This was alarming, but sadly not surprising to the local authorities. Over the course of a decade, there'd been a spike in unexpected vanishings and disappearances. The only thing they all had in common was that foul play was suspected in each instance. It seemed as if Indianapolis detectives had a serial killer on their hands, and whoever the perp was doing a good job at hiding his victims. Investigators spent day and night searching for this elusive man, hoping that one day he'd slip up and give them the lead they needed. Well, he went one step further than that. On April 20th of that year, Harriet Carr noticed that the door to her garage was slightly ajar. She could hear the family car's motor running. She went to look inside and saw her husband, Ted Carr, on the ground, dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. She rushed inside to turn off the still running car motor, only to find her husband wasn't the only one inside the garage. 3 other people were dead in the trunk of the vehicle. 2 females and a young boy. As you can guess, they were the missing Karen, Sandra, and Robert. A vacuum cleaner hose was leading from the car's tailpipe towards the trunk of the car. Harriet ran screaming from the garage, and her neighbors contacted the authorities. After looking over the scene, investigators found a revolver in Ted's jacket pocket and a handkerchief in his hand. After examining all of the evidence, they were able to piece together a pretty clear picture about what had happened. Ted had forcefully taken the 3 victims, had his way with the 2 females, and then ordered them all inside the trunk of his car at gunpoint. He drove them back to the family garage, where he connected the hose to the exhaust. He placed the other end inside the trunk and started the engine. He then closed and locked the trunk and left Karen, Robert, and Sandra to suffocate. Sometime later, Ted went back inside to check that all 3 of them were dead. He used a handkerchief to cover his nose as he opened the trunk, a way of protecting himself from the fumes inside. He didn't realize just how much toxic gas there would be when he opened the lid, and upon opening it, he immediately fell victim to his own plan. With the perp now identified and out of the picture, the investigators started working backwards to fill in the gaps of the case. It's like they had A and Z, but not B through Y. They began by looking into Ted's record, and boy, did this guy have a background history. He had done some pretty horrendous things in his past, most of which he got away with. This included picking up a pair of hitchhikers in 1947, only to drive them out to the woods, handcuff the male to a trailer hitch, and forcefully have his way with the female. He'd also swindled a blind elderly woman out of her life savings, and took a 14-year-old to Mexico for, quote-unquote, immoral purposes. For the last one, he received 5 years in prison, but was released after 3. A simpler time, let's put it like that. The biggest thing the investigators turned up, however, was that Ted was very likely responsible for another set of disappearances in 1967, 10 years prior to his fatal blunder. Lois Williams and her 17-year-old daughter Karen went missing back in February of that year, and it was even rumored that they both had an intimate relationship with Ted. Back then, Ted owned a service station that Lois would frequently use. On the night the 2 ladies disappeared, one of Ted's employees saw them both leave the gas station in Ted's car. The next morning, when he came back into work, that same employee found Ted lying in the street outside the station, bloody and dazed. Ted said that he had just been mugged, but insisted that nobody called the police. The employee ran into the store to check if anything had been stolen. Nothing had, but he did find something interesting. Ted's car was on one of the lifts, and it had been cleaned with a pressure washer, with particular focus on the trunk. One night after Lois and Karen went missing, that same employee's wife received a phone call. Both she and her husband lived next to Ted, and while she was home alone, Ted rang her up with a request. He said he was in the hospital, and that he thought he had accidentally left his garage door open. Would she be a dear and go and check it for him? He was worried that some of his tools inside might get stolen. Well, her husband had told her about the pressure washer incident at the car wash, and so she decided not to check things out for him. A decision that likely saved her life. Another neighbor later reported seeing Ted's car parked a few blocks away, so Ted's request was likely a trap. After Ted's passing and his twisted pastime being discovered, Lois and Karen's case was reopened, now with Ted as the main suspect. His garden was dug up and his house searched thoroughly. Nothing was found, and unfortunately, the investigators felt they weren't given enough time to check the place fully. Ted was revered as a master craftsman, and he had remodeled his entire basement shortly after Lois and Karen vanished. They believe that their bones are still somewhere inside that house, likely hidden within the walls. With the mystery of the Indianapolis killer finally solved thanks to sheer luck, or should I say, sheer incompetence on Ted's part, Now the only questions
Bro,
left are these.
alright.
Where did Ted hide the remains of the other people he killed? And how many other victims are there that we still don't know about?
I'm scared that there's a ghost. I'm scared that there's a ghost behind me. I'm fucking tripping. I'm tripping. I really can't, bro.
Last year, a 27-year-old Canadian cold case finally came to a close thanks to an inquisitive 13-year-old boy's love of swimming. Canadian cold
Let's
case.
go!
Try saying that 10 times fast. Back in 1992, 69-year-old Janet Farris mysteriously vanished whilst on her way to a wedding. She got in a car that morning and set off to the venue in Alberta, but she never arrived. For nearly 3 decades, her family and friends were left wondering what happened to her. It wouldn't be until 2019 that the truth behind her disappearance finally came to light. Max Wawrinka, 13, was swimming in Griffin Lake near Revelstoke, British Columbia, when he came upon something unusual in the water. At the bottom of the lake was an upturned car, a 1980s Honda. He became concerned and immediately alerted the Royal Canadian Mounties. Acting as their guide, Max led him to the spot where he'd found the car and dived down with his GoPro to get footage of it. Now with proof, they called in a dive team to check things out. Inside the submerged, rusty vehicle, they found the decomposed remains of Janet Farris. After a short investigation, they determined that there was no foul play involved in Janet's demise. She probably swerved to avoid hitting an animal in the road and accidentally plunged into the lake, where she perished inside.
I can't imagine dying like that, bro. Like, my biggest fear is drowning.
Her car. Max's decision to investigate the car led to this cold case finally being solved and allowed Janet's family some sense of closure. I think the worst thing was not knowing, said her son, George Farris, 62. And this is a happy story in the end, said her granddaughter, Erin, knowing her final resting place and knowing that it was an accident.
Hey, bro, but at least there wasn't any foul play involved. That shit is fucking scary. Well, that was Lazy Masquerade. 5 disturbing and bizarre mysteries. Hope you guys enjoyed my video, and leave a like and comment if you want. You don't have to, but I'd rather you do that. Subscribe, and I'll see you guys later, and see y'all in the next video. Peace.